Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin. Our guest this morning is Mr. Van Hargis of Victoria, Texas. Van has been called one of today's most versatile horsemen. This designation reflects a lifetime devoted to learning and communicating the elements of superior horsemanship as applied in a variety of disciplines. Van's trained and shown horses that have excelled in the ranch horse versatility, which is one of his favorites, Western pleasure, trail, calf and team roping, and steer wrestling. He is a veteran of loads of clinics and expos, and he always brings humanship into the focus and incorporates it into his message. Van, how are you doing this morning?
Man, Daniel, I'm doing great. Man, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with both you as well as your listeners. So I appreciate that. Thank you so kindly.
Absolutely. We've been friends for a good long while now, and I'm a little embarrassed that it's taken me this long to get you on here. But anyway, we'll have a nice conversation, I'm sure. I know you're an old pro with public speaking, but we still always have the lightning round questions to try to break the ice, and these will be a little bit nonsensical, so please just bear with me and enjoy the ride.
You bet.
What is your favorite way to relax?
Wow. Probably after my wife cooks an exceptionally good meal. And Daniel, to be honest, I'm a real softy. So I like to go watch videos of people doing really cool, successful things, following their dreams, such as YouTube videos of people who are trying out for and usually succeeding in, like America's Got Talent or American Idol, those types of shows. And to watch those people work hard to fulfill their dreams. And when they get those opportunities and they do well, and especially if they got an emotional story to go with it, I'm a big old softy, and I have to admit, sitting in my chair and escaping into those videos of those other people fulfilling their dreams, that helps me relax, and it also helps motivate me. So it not only relaxes me, but it really inspires me to get out and go do more of what God blessed us each the opportunity to do.
Cool. Morning or evening?
Oh, I'm definitely a morning person. I'm definitely up before the crack of dawn, as my wife would say one day. I'm sure she just mispronounced it, but she goes, "Crack ass of dawn." She said. And I said, "Didn't you mean ass crack?" She goes, "Well, you know what I mean. It's too dang early." So yes, sir. I'm a very very early morning person, and my wife is an evening person. So we just kind of pass in the hallway sometimes.
We have the same dynamic at my house. It can be complex at times. Yep.
Yes, sir.
Bay or sorrel?
Oh, goodness gracious. I've been blessed, Daniel, with some absolutely phenomenal sorrel horses in my lifetime. So I love a good sorrel horse, but the dark bays with the black legs and the seal point ears, those suckers just always turn my eye. I've always vowed that one of these days I'm going to own a really good one. And so I guess in a way I'm kind of both, but I would love the opportunity to have a great looking, awesome bay gelding.
This is I call these nonsensical, but I kind of always have my own opinion too. And it's probably more than 80% people picking bay horses. And I would have
Is
thought
it
it'd be more
really?
like
Wow.
50-50, but it's not at all 50-50. It is definitely bay horses. So
Yes,
go
sir.
figure.
I've had a lot more sorrel horses take me to the show pen and win me something than I have bays, but I'm just always attracted to a really, really good looking bay horse.
Well, you're in Texas with the King Ranch and the 4.6s, and they definitely had a preference toward sorrels there, so that might be part of it. Huh?
Yes, sir. And in fact, most of the ones that I've had they were all, had a little bit of Wimpy or I'm sorry, Peppy Sand Badger and Mr. Sand Peppy in them. So maybe that's where those sorrel horses come from for me.
We'll talk a little bit about those bloodlines later, because I don't think most people appreciate how much the breeding that's gone into that has changed horses over the course of the last 40 or 50 years. I know if you were going to start one of those little peppy horses 40 years ago, you'd better have some Velcro on your britches. It wasn't a question of if they were going to buck; it was a question of how long the ride was going to be, and
Right.
that's very much gone by the wayside these days. But anyway, okay.
Well, I have to be very grateful for that, because that's one of the things that kind of opened the door for my career, was the fact that when the Peppy Sand Badger babies were really, really getting popular, the honest part was nobody really wanted to start them. They all appreciated their athletic ability and their trainability, but they, as you just stated, they could be pretty waspy sometimes when we started them. But one of my mentors taught me a quote years ago. He said, "Well, Van, you wouldn't walk into an Irish pub and punch an Irishman in the nose and not expect to fight." Well, no, sir. He said, "Then if you already know what you know about those Peppy Sand Badger horses, then just approach them different." And Daniel, it completely changed my philosophy toward riding them. I took to quote an old quote by Tom Dorrance, I just took the time that it took. And it seemed as if that was the formula for me, at least, was just not push it and just give those colts a chance to accept everything. And even though it might seem like it was taking longer, it was getting those horses to the point where they developed confidence and that lack of sensitivity. And then as a result, we started having good success with them. Now, because those other trainers didn't want to ride them, a lot of those cutting horse guys would send those babies to me to start, and that started my reputation. And before you know it, I'd earned the reputation amongst that industry is send those colts to Van, he'll ride them. And so I really have to credit those Peppy Sand Badger horses back in the day for kind of putting my name out there for me. So I'm very grateful for them. And the ones that I've actually owned were kind of accidental. But I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity that those other trainers gave me to start those babies for them.
Absolutely. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Well, I'm a Texas boy, so I'm going to say absolutely not. For me, anyway. No, sir.
Do you have a preferred way to teach? So you have a podcast that you've done, you've got a YouTube channel and videos, contact through social media and your website, and then of course you also do personal appearances and clinics and expos and stuff. So among the various facets of how you communicate, do you have well, you wrote a book too. I forgot about that.
Yes,
So
sir.
do you have a preferred method? What's your favorite way to?
Well, the egotistical side says I love to go perform at these expos. I really enjoy a much larger audience and a larger crowd. But when it comes to people who are really serious about learning, I would much rather them take the time to come and visit us at the ranch and stay for as long as they can stay. Sometimes we have folks out for just an extended weekend. And sometimes, like, for example, right now we've got a couple out of New Zealand that's been here for 4 months. Um, there's so much more that we can teach people on a much closer and much more intimate basis with a greater likelihood of understanding and understanding what they're really doing. Because when they're here, they can watch me demonstrate it, they can hear me talk about it, and they can go and practice it. We can evaluate it, and even sometimes we'll video it and then go back over the video later. So honestly, Daniel, I would much rather have people come here, spend the extended stay with us, and let us help them get to their next goal by being here. So that's probably my favorite way to teach, because I get this much, and I get to know something about the people. Oftentimes, when we do these things over the internet, we get right to the chase. We address the question, make sure we fully understand it, make sure we fully understand it from the horse's perspective, best that they can describe it. But there's no intimacy there. There's no real connection. And so when they come to the ranch here, there's an opportunity for us to really make friends for life, and I really enjoy that.
Okay. Would you prefer to deal with a horse to start that is feral or spoiled?
Well, let me see, Daniel. I've had, way back in the day, we had plenty of opportunity to work with the BLM and work with the true feral horses. And my approach to them is completely different, and it's much more pure and natural. And yet my approach with the spoiled horse is to let the other horses train it. So I'll get the permission from the owners just to let me turn those horses out for a few days and let the other horses teach it a little bit more about manners. Um, Depending on how the horse is bred, I would really rather have the spoiled horse, although I'll be the first to admit that oftentimes it's those first few days is by far the biggest challenge. But feral horses are feral horses for a reason. And I don't want to slap any of those people in the face that have worked so stinking hard to breed the horses that we all should want to ride and support. And the feral horses are feral horses just for that reason. They're feral. Who knows how they're bred? So I felt like I would be doing a greater contribution to the industry and supporting the people in the industry that's always supported me by swallowing my pride and taking on that spoiled horse.
Would you tell us something totally unexpected about you?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's weird. I'm always shocked at how many people that I went to college with that never knew that I was ever in horses or had anything to do with horses. And then I'm also surprised that people I've always known and associated with in the horse industry never knew that I played college football. So I guess that's the thing that I'm always shocked as I feel like my whole life has been public in either one arena or the other. So I'm always surprised that people don't know that I was once a very focused college athlete, and now I'm a very focused professional horseman. So I guess that's the one thing that most people don't know about is the combination of the two.
So, what position did you play in football?
I was a freak of nature. I was a running back.
Okay.
I got to tell this real quick. I went to a football camp one time, and it was down in Houston. Of course, it was back when there was such a thing as the Houston Oilers, and Bum Phillips happened to be there at the camp, and he come walking by, and I just happened to be the only person of my race down in this one particular group, and he comes walking by. He goes, "Sir, you do realize, or young man, you do realize this is the running backs?" I said, "Yes, sir." He walks off a little piece. He comes walking back a little while later. He goes, "You do realize you need to be fast to play this position?" And I grinned at him, said, "Well, yes, sir." And he walked off. And a little while later, he comes walking back and goes, "You do realize that you're white?" And I said, "Yes, yes, sir." And he walks off again. And the rest of the camp was pretty funny and very, very enjoyable. But I just got so tickled at Mr. Phillips' very, very dry sense of humor. "You do realize you're white?" "Well, yes, sir."
You're probably about 8 inches taller than the rest of them too, would be my guess. Usually running backs are kind of built like a fire plug, and you're a pretty tall fella. So
Well, I'm only 6 foot, and I guess I was about average for the typical college running back. I was 6 foot, weighed about 210 by the time I graduated, and thank goodness God did bless me with some speed because I honestly, Daniel, I just ran in fear most of the time.
if you could choose any superpower, what superpower would you choose?
Oh my goodness! Wow, that's a great question. I've really given that much consideration. Wow, Daniel.
I'm preparing you for grandkids because that's going to be relevant here before long. They're going to be asking you questions like that, right?
Right. Well, we got a boatload of those already, but I guess I catch myself from time to time at the ranch when I'm riding a horse and letting the horse kind of settle and just soak in stuff. I catch myself just looking up a lot of times and watching the birds. And even though I'm a little bit afraid of heights, I would really love the opportunity to fly without the aid of an airplane. So I guess if I had a superpower, it'd be to fly, if that would be considered a superpower.
Absolutely. Same one for me. Yep, I would love that. It'd be nice for those waspy horses too. They buck you off and you just kind of float down nice and soft. Be just right.
Yes, sir, it sure would. Because sadly, my only experience with flying has been very, very short, very, very brief, and very abrupt stops. It's not doesn't do well for the body as it ages.
Yes, sir. Thoughts or feelings?
Thoughts or feelings? Well, I'm a pretty emotional fella, but I'm also very, very thoughtful. So, I mean, I think probably a little bit deeper than what I should sometimes. So I would tend to lean a little bit more toward thoughts. That's probably a guy thing.
Are you decisive or indecisive?
Woo, that's another good. Um, Daniel, I'm pretty darn decisive. It just may take me a while to make up my mind because my wife got on there one time. She said, well, "You realize it took you 3 years to buy a new truck?" And I made up my mind to buy it, but then I had to start studying for a while, and it took me about 3 years before I finally made up my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also that type that once I do make a decision, I'm ready to roll. It's time to let's get out there and let's get it done. So once the decision's made, by golly, I want to get it done. But I'm pretty decisive. It just may take me a while to consider all the options before I make that decision.
Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse related tool?
Yes, sir. By far, it's my reins. I am constantly teaching my students the value of rein management, and nothing helps you more than a good set of reins that feel good in your hands that you feel like you can communicate with the best. And at the same time, a good quality set of reins, whether it be leather or rope, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it, can send a very distinct signal to those horses. So by far, I would think that my reins would be um, would be my favorite piece of tack item.
So this is a new question amongst this list, but who is your favorite Batman?
Oh my goodness! I guess because Batman was one of those things I got to watch in the afternoons when I got off the school bus. I don't remember the guy's name, but the original Batman on the Batman show, kind of the
Adam West.
cartoon version. Yes, Adam West. That's exactly right. So he is my favorite, mainly because I guess because he was, I guess, the original. I don't know if he was the original, but at least he was the oldest one that I'm familiar with.
Do you have a favorite book or movie?
Well, my favorite book is the Bible. The more I read it, the more I realize how much there is to read and understand. And my favorite movie, and it may not be very original, but my favorite movie is Forrest Gump. What I love about that, Daniel, so much about Forrest Gump is that here is a guy who started out with extremely limited resources, limited intellect, and he was an extremely successful man by the time he finished his life's journey, only because his brain did not get in his way. He never thought for a moment that he couldn't. He just simply tried. And that to me has been an inspiration to me ever since I first saw the movie. So whenever I'm kind of feeling down in the dumps about something, I'll go plop in Forrest Gump and watch it. And it sure motivates me to get off my butt and quit making me think that everything needs to be perfect or that I don't have this or I don't have that. So Forrest Gump, I think, would be my personal choice of my favorite movie.
Okay, that's a good one, and good reasons too. He's certainly the poster child for try, isn't he?
He certainly is. Yes, sir.
So sweet, salty, or spicy?
Oh, I'm definitely a salty person. I love the occasional sweets, and I definitely love my sweet tea. But when it comes to food choices, I'm going to prefer something with just a little bit of salty deal. And if I had a snack to choose from, I'm going to choose a salty snack over a sweet one any day.
Right there with you. What is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Oh my goodness. I guess the deep sea creature, I'd kind of lean toward that one just because I'm fascinated by everything that an octopus can do. They can get little, they can get big, they can change their colors, they can be extremely friendly, but at the same time, they can also be as aggressive as need be. So for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I favor an octopus when it comes to a sea creature.
They're kind of the poster child for dynamic and flexible, aren't they? I mean, just no matter the
That is for
situation
sure.
you throw at them, they got a tool to handle it, don't they?
That's right. Yes, they sure do. Yes, sir.
And have you ever had a UFO encounter?
Well, Daniel, not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. Now, I thought I had a Bigfoot encounter once upon a time, but no,
Oh,
sir, I don't
dang.
think I've ever had a UFO encounter.
Well, tell us about that. I got to hear more.
Well, my wife just laughs at me all the time because I still to this day believe there's a Bigfoot. I grew up and went to high school and college both in a little town called Commerce, Texas. And just outside of Commerce, it's all underwater now. There's Cooper Lake up there, but used to that would be considered Horton Bottom. And as a kid, we spent a lot of time up there in Horton Bottom, hunting and fishing and doing all sorts of things. And one night, me and a couple of my buddies were up there by the river, and we thought we heard something, and we just got really quiet and listened because that was a big area for wild hogs back in that day, and so we just assumed that it was wild hogs. And we got to listening, and it didn't sound like wild hogs. And in fact, you could tell it was just only one something. We didn't know what it was. It was only one, and it just made some extremely odd noises. And then one of my buddies says, "You know what? We need to get through these woods." Get off the river, get through the woods, and get back to where the truck is parked. So we started walking back that way, and then as we're walking, we heard that noise again, but it was closer. And then we heard it a third time, and it sounded like it had just gotten to the river and it crossed the river, which means now it's on the same side of the river as we are. And it sounded like it was getting closer. So we went to humping it a little bit, getting a little bit out of there. And by the time we got to the truck, we were pretty darn convinced. And granted, we didn't see anything, but we were pretty darn convinced that all the rumors that we had heard there over the years about Bigfoot, we were convinced that was Bigfoot. That was the legend of the Boggy Creek. Boggy Creek monster was just outside of Commerce, Texas, as far as we were concerned.
Yes, sir.
So,
Well, when you
and
look at
as a
it,
kid, of course, what might have contributed a little bit to that little fantasy thing there was when I was a kid, there was a movie, and that's what it was titled. It was called The Legend of the Boggy Creek. Well, that same river that we were talking about connected to that same part of the country up in northeast Texas, southeastern Oklahoma, and of course, western Arkansas. So it was possible. We just don't know.
when you look at a map of the Earth, like Canada, for instance, it's about a third of the landmass of Earth is essentially uninhabited. And even
Yeah.
with Canada, something like 80% of the Canadian population lives within 50 miles of the U.S. border. So they're as far south as they can get, essentially. So definitely there's enough forest out there with nobody in it that something like that could be going on. So who knows?
I
Sweet
tend to
dreams.
agree with that because I tend to agree with it because we're still to this day, as many scientists as we have, there are still folks out there discovering new species of all sorts. And of course, I appreciate the folks that will tell you there's no real hard evidence yet. So I agree with that. But until they do discover these new species, there was never hard evidence of those species either. So who knows? I want to stay open minded. Let's think about the possibilities.
We tend to have short memories too. So just 5,000 years ago, woolly mammoths were roaming Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. So that's
Yes,
that's not
sir.
all that far back. So who knows what
Yes,
could
sir.
be up north of us right now.
That's exactly right. Yes, sir.
Well, I might have forgotten to tell you this, man, but those questions are for points, and I've just tabulated your score. You have the high score so far of anyone that's ever answered the short answer question. So you got
Oh my goodness.
791 points, which entitles you to either a genuine compliment or an awkward silence. Your choice.
Well, I'll take that genuine compliment because I still have a little ego after all these years. So I'll,
Well, sure. Well, I'm going to say that I think among the clinicians that I know, you're probably one of the more genuine and articulate. You really do a very good job of getting across what you're trying to get across, where some of the rest of us stumble around a little bit more. And you're also a tremendously empathetic type of a person that always has the other people's heart on your mind. You and I both know there are some heartless people in this game, and I think you're genuinely one of the good ones. So I hope
well,
that.
Daniel, I really appreciate that. And for any of the listeners, I'd like to just encourage them to, no matter what, remain, because the most important thing that you said there to me at that moment was that genuine aspect. I have to credit my grandparents for really emphasizing that with me throughout my entire life, is to always be who you are and be proud of who that is and be proud of the journey that got you to where you are. And if I could ever give any young person out there advice that's going to be in the world, communicating with other people and potentially influencing other people, is remain true and remain genuine, because I can't think of anybody who truly loves a hypocrite. And sometimes it's not easy being who you are when you know that who you are is right, and you know the situation that surrounds you is wrong. It may not always be popular, but stay true. And and that's a hard lesson to have to learn sometimes. There's been parts and times of my career I've been very, very blessed in my career, very blessed. But at the same time, we've had to make decisions that was either to kind of go with the flow of things or stay true, knowing that staying true was going to cost us opportunity. And the old cliche says, when God closes one door, he opens another. And I couldn't agree with that more. But sometimes that carrot at the end of the stick might not always be the carrot. So I would definitely want to encourage your listeners and those young folks out there to just simply do what's right. And what's right, what's in your heart. And if you ever betray that, you'll never really appreciate yourself as much. So just stay true. Stay true.
Well said. Well said. One of my just a little snarky sort of appreciation I have, since we were just talking about Bigfoot. You have these like sayings on T-shirts. Well, I love this one. It's believe in yourself even if no one else does. Bigfoot as the author down at the bottom. So
There you go.
seemed applicable in this moment
Yeah.
for some reason.
Yeah.
Oh,
I need to try to find that one on Amazon and get that one just so I can wear it around my wife.
perfect. Oh,
Yeah.
well, Van, would you give us the 30,000-foot view of what it is that you do these days?
Well, Daniel, I'm spoiled rotten. I get to stay home more than I ever have in my life. We spent several of my years of my career traveling up and down the road, going to every horse expo that you could imagine, doing clinics literally all over the world. And there was a point in time there that I just got tired. So sometimes we were on the road anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks at a time before I'd get back home again. As much as I enjoyed it, and as many phenomenal people as we met, and as many great horses I got a chance to ride and work with, I'm so, so grateful for those times, because I think those times help afford me the opportunity to do what we do today. And we get to work with a tremendous number of people, but now the difference is they come to me. They come here at the ranch. One of the first things we built when I bought this place down here in Victoria was a dormitory. And that dormitory holds, well, or will house up to 8 people. And then we also are in the process of building cabins on the ranch, just so that we can have more people come and stay more comfortably for longer periods of time. And it just affords me the opportunity to still do what I love to do, which is help people. People, I mentioned this in my book, Daniel, that people say all the times, oh my gosh, you've been in the horse business since you were such a young child, and you must really love horses. And the answer to that question is, Daniel, yes, I do, but not for the reasons that people think. To be honest, I'm allergic to horses. I have asthma, and I'm allergic, which means that when I'm around the horses, I have a greater chance of having asthma trouble. So you'd think that I would hate them, but no, I love what I get to go through around the horses, because the horses is the bridge that brings the people to me, or vice versa. It takes me to the people, because I really love people. I love watching people, watching how they develop. I love watching how people learn. I love hearing people's success stories. I love it when successful people that are already successful in some other field come to the ranch and they share with us their successes, and they want to learn how to be better horsemen. And so to me, the perfect day and the perfect experience for me is the opportunity to, from that 30,000-foot view you said, is just to look down on the ranch and think, thank God that I paid the dues that I paid so that I can afford the life that we live today. And I don't mean afford it financially. I mean just afford the time and the enjoyment of getting to do what we do today. I'm truly blessed, Daniel.
Well, very well said. And you have a pretty interesting story as to how you started your endeavors into the world of professional horsemanship. Would you share that with us briefly?
Well, yes, sir. Well, the little town we grew up in, or I grew up in, just outside of Commerce, Texas, it was actually halfway between Commerce and Greenville. And there was a little bitty podunk town called Campbell, Texas. Well, a lot of folks don't know, but that's also the home of Billy Cook. His original saddle shop was in Greenville, actually on the interstate, going from Commerce to Greenville. There's interstate up there called Interstate 30. Well, of course, his saddle shop is up there on Interstate 30, but his home was, oh, maybe probably not even three-quarter of a mile away from where I was raised. And of course, like any 12-year-old kid, I'm riding horses. And I was an only child too, Daniel. So as an only child, you find yourself entertained by the animals. So I was always out riding horses, or, playing with a pig we were going to slaughter. I was raising a calf or playing with the dogs. And I was always outside. Well, when I was riding the horses up and down, sometimes I'd get bored. My mom would let me ride the horses down the highway. So I'd ride up and down the road ditches and just spend time on the horses. Well, Miss Cook, Billy Cook's wife, would see me all the time up there riding up and down the road, or she'd come out the house. I'd be out there riding horses around out there. So one day she approached me and she said, "Van, what do you got going this summer?" Well, I don't know, Miss Cook. She goes, "Well, if I brought a little filly down here, could I just get you to ride her like you do all these other horses? Just ride her all over the place. Just ride her up and down the road and just get her really nice and quiet for me." Well, yes, ma'am, I'd be happy to. So sure enough, I get off for summer break out of school, and she brings that little filly down there. She said, "Now, don't let your daddy ride her now, because he's too big and she's just a little thing. So I just want to see you ride her all summer." I said, "Yes, ma'am." So just like a good little kid would do, boy, I rode that horse. I rode the hair off of it all summer long. And of course, I just did what kids would do. I can't say, Daniel, I knew what the heck I was doing at 12. I just rode a lot, and just, I got them what you might call kid broke, because
Mm-hmm.
I did stupid stuff that kids do on young horses. I jumped off of buildings on them, climbed off of fences on them, and you name it. Just do 12-year-old kid stuff. Well, at the end of that summer, Miss Cook come down there to pick up that filly from me, and of course she was riding around pretty darn nice, and she wrote me a check for $300, and I was probably the richest 12-year-old kid I knew. I had more money than my mom and daddy did. So I had $300. So that to me got me realizing that at least the door from that moment on was open for me to have that kind of fun and get paid for it too. So I guess that kind of stuck in the back of my mind, because somehow or the other I kept getting drawn back into the horse industry. So when I got out of college, it wasn't long after I was out of school that I made the horse industry my profession.
Well, there's not a whole lot of people that can say they got started off with their first riding job from a legend like that. That's pretty cool. Uh,
Yes. Then I want to share another quick story with you about Billy Cook. As I mentioned earlier, I got to the point in my career where I was traveling all over the place doing clinics and seminars, and we were getting approached by various sponsors to help promote their products and things while we're out on the road and in front of their target audiences. And a company that I didn't know anything about called Saddlesmith approached me and wanted to know if I would endorse a saddle for them. And I'd never even heard of the company, but I was extremely honored. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get a saddle sponsor. This is cool. But remember what I said earlier about be true? Well, I told that guy, I said, "Man, I really appreciate that. I'm honored. I've never been approached, for a saddle sponsor. So I'm deeply honored. But to be honest, sir, my first customer um, was the wife of Billy Cook. So I at least owe him the opportunity to turn me down before I say yes to you." So I called, and here's the humbling part. I get home from that trip, and I called Billy Cook and said, "Mr. Cook, hi, this is Van Hargis." And who? Who's this? Van Hargis. "I used to be your neighbor down the road down there." "You mean Doug Cooper's stepson?" "Yes, sir, that would be me." "I know I know who you are. What do you want?" I mean, just as cold and as callous and crotchety. He said, "What do you want?" I says, "Well, sir, a couple of weeks ago, I was out on the road and doing what I do, and a company by the name of Saddlesmith approached me and wanted to know if I'd endorse a saddle. And I told them that I needed to visit with you first, because of course, your wife was my first customer. Well, what kind of saddle do you think you'd want? Well, I don't know, sir. I said, I do a little bit of everything. I calf rope, team rope. And of course, I ride, colts for a lot of folks. And now I do ranch horse versatility. I do everything. So all around type of saddle, something like that. Well, I can build you an all around saddle. You put all the dimensions down for it or all the specs down for it, and I'll come up with something. And I'm thinking, are you serious? So sure enough, I go to putting all these specs together and get ready to do that saddle and send it up there to him. And we talk about it a little bit. And Daniel, back in that day and time, I wanted a saddle that had cutaway skirts. But up till that point, the closest thing to a cutaway skirt was what they called a butterfly skirt that you saw a lot on the Western pleasure saddles. And Billy saw that cutaway skirt and he thought that was the stupidest thing. He said, a cutaway skirt, what the hell is that? Well, I just want to be able to ride a little bit closer contact. I find that helps me a lot with these babies. That's the stupidest darn thing I've ever heard of, he said. I says, well, if there's any way possible, I'd like for you to do that for me. So sure enough, he builds that saddle, puts the cutaway skirt on it. And that year or that following January, we put it at the Denver market up there back when the market was in Denver. And that was the number one selling saddle that Billy Cook had that year was that Van Hargis all around. And I just thought it was so funny how he went from not knowing who I was or not remembering who I was. And of course, that was very humbling to me because I kind of thought I was somebody at that point. he brought me back to reality pretty quick. And but then when he introduced that saddle, just because it was new and it was different, it made it the number one saddle of his saddles that year, just because it was new and it was different. And then that kind of started the trend, thanks to Billy. That kind of started the trend for all the cutaway skirt saddles that are out there today. And so I credit Billy for helping me develop that idea and having the guts to follow through with it, even though it had never been done.
Well, I want to thank you for that because that's one of those features that I find pretty important in a saddle. Like you, I ride a lot of colts and I like to get as much leg on them as I can. And it really bugs me when I get in a saddle that's got big old thick fenders and skirts and stuff on it and kind of keeps me away from the horse. I want to be right on top of them if I can be.
Yes,
so
sir.
that's
yes, sir. And isn't it weird too?
feature.
Like if you ever go ride a saddle that doesn't have cutaway skirts, you can definitely feel that it's in the way, can't you?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And up until then, I didn't know what I was missing, to be honest. But once I got those skirts cut away, I really can't see myself ever being comfortable in um, any other saddle. And not that there's not some great ones out there. There's some phenomenal saddles out there with full skirts on them. I don't ever want to sound like I'm dogging those styles because they've been around for years and they're tried and true and proven. But man, now I just can't see myself ever going back to that.
Well, since we've kind of opened the ball with Mr. Billy Cook, I did want to ask you about some of the other mentors and legends in the business that you may have had the privilege of personally knowing. I'll kind of point you in the direction here a little bit. I come from a cutting horse background, and I have kind of always thought that cutting kind of had two fathers, sort of Buster Welsh and Matlock Rose, and all of the trainers up until about 20 years ago basically apprenticed under one or the other. And so Matlock had his horses really broke and bridled up, and Buster, of course, was known for loping around on the wrong lead and that kind of stuff and just not really caring about putting a handle on a horse. So I think that's one of those things a lot of people don't appreciate is how you kind of had those conflicting styles. And I would say now kind of the best of both worlds is more what's out and about. But do you have any other thoughts or feelings about past legendary horsemen like that?
Well, first of all, those two that you just mentioned truly are legends of our industry. I think they influenced the industry probably as much or more than anybody, especially in the show horse world, and then two, in the ranch horse world, more so than what people realize. Because Buster Welch was a ranch cowboy by far. He was not just a horseman that had great success in the cutting pen. He was also a true ranch cowboy, and his method of training was definitely considered different than what today's standard would be, just because, like you said, his horses had purpose. Not that some other people's out there don't. I'm not saying that. It's just that his horses had purpose first, And then if they showed real talent with that, then he would take them to the show pen. And as long as they could cut a cow, I don't think he was as concerned as, like you mentioned, them being on the incorrect lead. I don't think he was as concerned about that. But boy, when he put him on a cow and dropped his hand, that's where his training and his talent really shined. I mean, that makes me remember another thing that one of my other mentors shared with me years ago about horses that can sometimes and very easily in today's world become overtrained and underridden. And nobody could ever say that about Buster Welch. His horses were definitely ridden and then trained also, instead of the other way around, overtrained and underridden. He just, like I said, he just had purpose. Matlock Rose is a legend, not just in the cutting horse industry, but in pretty much everything stock horse. Stock horse, of course, preceding what we know today as reining. But Matlock Rose was by far, I think, one of the best horsemen that our industry has ever known. One of my biggest influences, though, was a guy with a lot more refinement than both of those two gentlemen. A very articulate, very kind man by the name of Jack Brainard. I met Jack up in Denton, Texas one year at a regional 4-H show at the Rex Cobble Ranch back when Cutter Bill was in the industry. And Rex Cobble at that time hosted that regional 4-H judging contest every year. Well, my mom and my stepfather were the 4-H leaders for our region. And we went up there, but I was too young. I was only 8 years old. And I didn't know any better. So I just go up there and I registered like all the other kids did. And I started judging horses. I just started kind of following the little groups around and was judging the horses. At the end of that day, they were calling out the students that were going to make the finals. And my name got called out. And when it got called out, my mom ran up there and said, "You can't use Van because he's not old enough. He wasn't supposed to register." Well, it broke my heart because I thought, well, who cares if I'm too young? Because you're supposed to be 9. I was only 8. Who cares if you're too young, Mama? I did it. I went through it and I did it. But Mama explained it to me the best way a mama could, which was to say, "But Van, if you do it, you're going to take somebody else's spot, and you're simply just not old enough." Well, I was just bawling. I understood, but I was still crying. I was upset about it. And Mr. Brainerd happened to be there, and he walked over there and grabbed my hand and said, "Well, you just come go with me, because we're going to go judge the rest of those horses in the semifinals." And he led me around and let me do those. Now, here's the sad part. I didn't even know who Jack Brainerd was at that point in time. I just knew he was a really kind man that had some sympathy and empathy for an 8-year-old kid that had earned a spot but wasn't old enough. Well, years later, I began to realize who he really was, and I was a fan ever since. And then I began to realize how legendary he truly was as a horseman and as a man. Then, since we had that initial ice breaking, I guess you could call it, and he had my undying respect, I began to call on him from time to time, with problems that I was having with my colts or with my horses. And of course, he was always eager to help. And then years later, he got even more involved with the Stock Horse of Texas. Him and several other guys were the founders of that great association. And Jack actually was the one that came up with, him and B.F. Yates were the ones that came up with that quote that said, "We want people to ride a better horse." And to ride a better horse, I said, man, what a great mission. And that just fit him to a T. And he just had a way of uncomplicating what some people think are complicated maneuvers. He was known as the master of the lead change. And he probably could break that lead change down and make it so incredibly simple. And I use what he taught me today. And I'll promise you, Daniel, not a single student will leave my program on a colt that they just started. And 90 days later, that colt will be doing flying lead changes, not because of me, but because of what Jack helped me learn to communicate. So he was by far the master of the lead change. And to my mind, will always be one of those legends of our industry because of who he was, not only as a trainer, but who he was as somebody sharing what he knew with countless others. And he was also always a student of the horse as well.
Yes, sir. That really was a time. I think both he and Matlock Rose have a reputation of that. That was back when a trainer showed in halter, and you kind of did everything on one horse, and so they weren't maybe as specialized, but as far as well rounded and understanding things, you would be hard pressed to find very many horsemen of today's age that have the depth of knowledge that those guys had back then. They really were masters of the whole picture, for sure.
They truly were. And the sad part is, and I tried to emphasize that in my book, is that Jack was, he was always so willing to go communicate with people. He died at the ripe old age of 100, and he did his last clinic, Daniel, when he was 99 years old. But it's very important for us to realize that that generation of horsemen is probably the best generation of horsemen that our generation or that our lifetime will ever see, because more things change and change for the better during that time frame than any other, because that generation also had people like Tom Dorrance, Ray Hunt, Jack Brainard, Buster Welch, Matlock Rose, and Don Dodge, and the list goes on and on and on. And I'm sorry for leaving so many great legends out, but those are just the ones that just come to the top of my head just really, really quickly. But almost every one of those, if not all of those people, are all dead now. I think somebody told me the other day that BF Yates is still alive. And if we don't gather what those men taught now, it's too late. And like I said, most of them already passed away.
Yes.
The good thing is that most of those people documented their careers in one way or the other. And we do need to learn and appreciate what those men learned. And there was no shortcuts. It was just good hard work and understanding the horse, both mentally and mechanically.
I had the privilege of riding in a Jack Brainard clinic. I think he was 95 or 96. So he rode right up until he was about 93, I believe. And then he just basically lost the abdominal strength to be able to do it anymore. And he could still crank out lead changes like poetry, even at that age. So he had been out of the saddle for a couple years when he did this clinic. And I can remember one of the things that absolutely shocked me about him was he sat up in the stands with a microphone while we all rode. And even at 95 or 96, whatever he was, that man's eyesight was perfect. He could watch us ride and he didn't miss, he could tell at the trot if you were going to catch the correct lead or the wrong lead, or whether the horse was balanced the way it should have been. And you would think at 95, he just couldn't see the arena well enough to be able to pick out details like that, but he was as sharp as a tack. And
Yes,
I
sir.
really always appreciated, he was a Western horseman, but he had influence that went into the racing world with D. Wayne Lucas. And then he had a very strong understanding of dressage and all, which he still incorporated into the Western stuff. A lot of people would kind of think of the old cowboy as being uneducated, but that man was as well read as anyone you've ever met. He had a way of talking about, like you say, the way he could break things down and make them simple. His incorporation of the thoracic sling of the horse in the collection was a game changer for me. It really changed the way that I looked at and thought about that stuff, and was really sort of one of those, I don't know how I didn't figure out this by myself, but he put all of the pieces of the puzzle into the line for me that made sense. So truly a legend. Absolutely.
Yes, sir. And you hit the nail on the head too. And you said he was so many other disciplines that he studied, because I had the opportunity to visit with him at his place in his barn on numerous occasions. And I never saw Jack in his chair without a book without his chair that he was reading. And I never saw his bed without a book on the nightstand that he was reading. He was always a student of the horse. And again, to give you an example of that, I had the great opportunity of doing a clinic with Jack, with kind of a co-clinician type thing in Abilene at the Stock Horse of Texas clinic one year. And we literally had the arena divided in half. And I'm looking at one end and coaching one end, and Jack was looking at the other and coaching that end. And we're both on horseback right in the middle of the arena, facing our respective directions. And I yelled out something at somebody, and out of the corner of my eye, I see my mentor here, this guy that I just had so much respect for, shaking his head like I must have said something wrong. And I didn't want him to school me in front of God and everybody. So I said, Jack, turn your microphone on. So he turned his microphone off and he said, what is it? And he said, did I say something wrong? Oh, no, I liked what you said. Well, why were you shaking your head? No. He said, oh, I wasn't shaking my head. No, I was just thinking. What were you thinking? I was just thinking, I'm afraid I'm going to die before I learn everything about these darn horses that I want to learn. And Daniel, he was 86. And it's not
Yes.
that I said anything brilliant. I just said it different than what he had probably heard it said before. But he was 86 years old at that time. And I'm thinking, if this sucker is still learning as much as he's learning at 86, I just hope like heck that I can learn so much later on in life. And in fact, he was the one that inspired my quote that says, I have no desire to retire, because he was the one that told me years ago that you're going to get to a point in time in your life and you're not going to be able to ride horses every day, not enough to make a living. He said, but you do have the ability to communicate and learn and share with other people that what you do learn. You can do that when you're 86 years old. You're not going to be able to ride enough horses to make a living when you're 86. So Jack was a great inspiration in seeing beyond your productive years in the saddle as well.
Well, I think that kind of segues nicely into what we were talking about earlier in the lightning round questions about the changes that we've seen in horses over the years. And we had talked about the little peppy horses and all. To me, I can remember my career isn't as long as yours, but I've been at this for nearly 30 years now. I definitely saw more bronky horses in the cow horse bloodlines at that time, and I think we've had some influential sires, none greater than Highbrow Cat, that came in and kind of put a much more trainable mind on them than some of the original cow horse bloodlines like the Little Peppies and the Peppy Sands. And Smart Little Lena was another one. If you started an own son or daughter of Smart Little Lena, that was like riding a deer for the first couple of months. So uh, things have gotten a whole lot easier on our end. What are some of your thoughts or observations on the changes that you've seen in your lifetime in horses, breeding
Well,
wise,
I definitely
genetic
think
wise?
I think there's been a lot more emphasis on what you just touched on. That was trainability. We had bred some of the greatest athletes that I think that we could ever expect to have sit in front of a cow or run down and do sliding 11s, in a show pen. So our athletic ability that we'd put on them had obviously already began to shine. The question was is how many horses were being rejected because of lack of trainability. They just couldn't handle the pressure, or we just weren't going to be able to get them broke enough in time for some of our major events. Not that they weren't good horses and weren't going to make good horses, but the lack of trainability cost us too much time. So I think that us joining those two things together over the years, developing a little bit bigger bone on them again, because I think we went there for a while. We were kind of breeding some bone out of the horses, and of course we all paid the price of you know countless millions of dollars spent across the world on hip and hock or stifle and hock injections. So once we began to breed the physicality back in there, but we would maintain the athleticism, the next thing was to come, of course, was the trainability. And honestly, these last several years that I've had the luxury of starting a few of the reining top end reining horses today, dude, they're already broke. You don't have to do anything with them. Just kind of show them what you want, get out of their way, and just start refinement almost from day one, because they're just so broke. And we're starting to see that more and more in the cutting horse world too. But there is a downside. 20 plus years ago, we started seeing clinicians popping out of the woodwork everywhere. And admittedly, I was one of them. But the demand was there because of the popularity of the horse expos, the popularity of some of the trivial things such as the cult starting challenges all over the United States, and especially the one particular one that really kind of started the whole thing even more so. Um, but then we started seeing the clinician world started desensitizing horses, to where everything was desensitized, desensitized, desensitized. And here's the reality, though, Daniel. I've seen a lot of horses that are gentle but not broke. I've never seen a horse that was really broke that didn't get gentle. But you see, you've got to understand where we put our priority. When you see these clinicians that are going out there that have probably never ridden a performance horse a day in their life, and they go out there and they focus on desensitization, what they don't realize, that horse will probably never make a great athlete. he'll never have the opportunity to become a good athlete, despite how well he's bred. Why? Because they've overdone the desensitization of the point that you've taken the response time out of it. These horses that are phenomenal cutters, we need to maintain those horses' quickness and alertness and quickness to recognize signal and or cue. And if we spend too much time desensitizing those great minds and those great brains, we end up dulling out the athleticism. So that's been one of the biggest things that I've seen is almost a bigger, broader gap between our clinician trainer and our performance horse trainer. And both have a purpose. I mean, the largest segment of our industry is still, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but the largest segment of our industry is still the little short fat lady that just wants to have a relationship with her horse. But and again, I don't mean that disrespectfully. So there is a purpose for that type of trainer and that type of clinician. But my goodness, let's do that with all the feral horses and not do that with these horses that somebody had spent some unbelievably great time and resources training these horses, or I'm sorry, breeding these horses to do all the wonderful things we want them to do today. So that's part of it. The other part of it is I don't like how we've gotten further and further away or further and further into the specialization. I grew up in the day and time to where we had one horse that did multiple things, which is why I jumped on the versatility bandwagon. But sadly, now we're even starting to see the versatility stuff specialize. You see a lot of horses out there doing ranch riding and ranch trail that'll never sit face in front of a cow. And that's not what the versatility thing was designed to be. The ranch horse versatility horse was designed to be one horse that could go and perform in multiple events. The fact that it had ranch in front of it also meant that it was meant to have the spirit and intent to promote and train the better ranch horse. And I just got through judging a national show in Sweetwater for the American Stock Horse Association. I didn't see a single horse, not a single one, Daniel, compete that didn't have sliding plates on. And I can't imagine a ranch horse going out and working in a real job with sliding plates on. As you and I both know, it's extremely dangerous. So what did we really do? We just put a new title on another show horse. And that's not what the spirit and intent was meant to be. So we've even specialized that segment. And don't get me wrong, I'm still deeply grateful for the industry. I still love the direction that it's traveling. I just wish that we could focus more on the lack of specialty more so than the true specialty.
I couldn't agree with every part of that more. The clinician part of it and all of it. There's a lot of situations I've been in working cattle where that horse has a much larger field of view than I do. And maybe you get that mad mama cow coming up on 4 o'clock and you don't see it, but the horse does and gets you the hell out of there. And that one that's standing flat footed with a that'll is desensitized to everything in the world is going to get you killed in a lot of practical situations like that.
You're exactly right. That's exactly right. Is that people don't realize that there's a need for that horse still maintaining that quick response time and not that dull, that, oh, everything's okay type scenario. We need those horses to still maintain that sense of self-preservation. The difference in training should be the art of discernment, learning to discern when they need to move versus when they need to be relaxed. And if you dull them down to everything, you take that part away. And I just wish we could get part of that back and let people understand there's a purpose and a reason for it. We just want a horse to manage themselves, and that's the true art of horsemanship, is learning to teach those horses how to manage that reactiveness and how to manage that response time.
I think it ties in hand with the clinicians you were talking about, in that I feel like there are a lot of clinicians out there. In fact, whenever I send out letters and stuff, I always say, "Hi, my name's Daniel Dolphin. I'm one of the 1,278,863 horsemanship clinicians in the U.S." But I feel like there's a ton of them out there that are greener than they realize. And in just as we would look at a horse as being green and having a training progression, one of the first things you learn as a trainer is how to desensitize a horse. And there's a very typical stage there where you kind of get impressed with yourself and what you can desensitize a horse to. And it kind of comes down to that question of, I know you can, but should you? You need a
Right.
little,
It's exactly right.
yeah,
Yeah.
a little more of the wisdom and experience before you realize like there's a point of good enough, and there's a point of, just like with the specialization, where we take a good concept, but we push it and push it and push it until it becomes a perversion of what the original intent was. One of my pet peeves is get a cutting horse over here to tune up for a show that I don't know. I've had more than I can tell you that you can't take out into the pasture to bring the cattle up. And it's
Yeah.
unfathomable to me of how you could train a cutting horse, but have never left the arena and actually pinned cattle in a pasture before. But I'm here to tell you there's a bunch of them where taking them out into the pasture is going to be an adventure. I've had customers that
Yes,
had to
sir.
dismount and just walk the horse back up to the arena before. And it just boggles my mind how that stuff happens, but it does. So
Yes, sir. Daniel, we had a 3-year-old stud horse several years ago that when the guy decided to leave him a stud, he left him up, in a stall in a turnout area, but the turnout area didn't have any grass in it. And then when he brought the horse to me for me to train, he wanted me to train him for ranch horse versatility because we were having good success with that at the time. Our colts spend some arena time, but every day, I mean, I used to boast to people that I think our cows get checked more than anybody's cows I know because every day, as soon as we finished with a colt, we'd open the gate, we'd go out and ride through the cows and just check them just because not because the cows need to be checked, but just to give the horses that opportunity to get out in the pasture and just be around the cattle in the real world. But the very first time I went to ride that 3-year-old stud colt out, he walked up there. I opened the gate on him really good. I went to open him up and step off into the pasture, and he freaked out. And I couldn't figure out. I thought it was something in the grass that was scaring him. I thought, gee, I wonder what's down there. I didn't know if it was something in the grass that I couldn't see. And then it dawned on me, it's nothing in the grass. He's afraid of the grass. The wind was blowing the tops of the grass from side to side, and he had never seen grass moving. And here's a 3-year-old stud colt afraid to walk out in knee deep grass. And it just blew my mind that a horse could be 3 years old and already saddle broke, but not riding out in grass. It just blew my mind, Daniel. Blew my mind.
yes, sir. That's a little bit when I asked you the question about feral or spoiled. The spoiled horses are the ones that I don't care for, and the sole reason is because someone worked really hard to make the problem that you're now having to deal with. And I
Right.
know
Yeah.
people do the best they can with what they have and everything, but as those of us that kind of spend our time trying to educate, sometimes you like I've said that 30,000 times. How do we still have a chunk of people in the world that don't understand, this simple matter? Like one of my other pet peeves, I'll just say with the clinicians is all of this disengagement of the hindquarter. I think
Oh,
that
absolutely. Yes, sir.
there it's an important skill, but it's kindergarten. There's a point at which you can definitely do too much of it. I've seen there's a couple clinicians in particular that really harp on that. Whenever I get one of their customers in a clinic, they can't ever catch their leads because the horse's butt is always running away from them instead of getting underneath himself like he's supposed to. And I describe riding those horses, it's like a car on a gravel road that's fishtailing. Their butt is just
Yeah.
flailing around in the wind there behind you, and someone worked really hard to cause that problem that's now going to take probably a few months to straighten out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, that was one of the biggest topics that me and Jack Brainard used to always talk about. It was a major buzzword in the industry for a while, and sometimes it still is. Oh, you got to learn to disengage the hindquarter, disengage the hindquarter. And there's probably less than 5% of the time that anybody ever needs to ever disengage the hindquarter. The rest of the time, In order for this horse to perform anything that you want it to do, I don't care, even if all you want to do is just go trail riding. And I'm not discounting trail riding at all. I tell people all the time that's a whole heck of a lot more dangerous than what I normally do. So don't think for a minute I don't take trail riding very, very seriously. But you can't trail ride unless the horse has got his hind end engaged. So considerably less than 5% of the time do we want the horse to be able to disengage his hips. The important part is that the horse and the rider know how to do such and when to do such. But it's not really that good of an emergency brake either, in my opinion. Because again, people get to harping more on that than they do just simply riding their horse. But to me, the hind quarter, I mean, I'm going to say 99% of the time we're working on engaging the hind end, getting the hind end more in direction of what we want to achieve than disengaging it.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Well, Van, I think we've come to the point where I need to acknowledge our sponsor of this episode. And we've got a new sponsor for this one. I'm pretty proud of them. They approached me because I'm in Louisiana and we've got a lot of water around here, and it was a good fit. So our new sponsor is H2O Crap. Have you ever gotten busy doing a small task and forgotten another small task, like that you were filling up a water trough or had a sprinkler on in the arena? I can personally admit that I have mistakenly formed Lake Dolphin in my arena more than a few times. Has the water company guy ever knocked on your door because you dropped pressure on the main line for an entire rural community? Do they think you have a pool, but you only have a water trough? Has your truck ever been collateral on a loan to pay back the water bill? If so, you need H2O Crap. Simply install H2O Crap on your water heater, and every continuous water flow over 10 minutes will be stopped at the source. H2O Crap. It's keeping mosquitoes and frogs at bay since 2014. H2O Crap. You can plan for a poor memory. All right. Well, we've paid the bills now, Van, so I feel a little better about that one.
Daniel, I couldn't help but to laugh at that the whole time you were reading that. I'm thinking, holy smokes, what an amazing thing that would be. Because I'm like you, I have created Lake Hargis on on more than one occasion, and like most trainers do, I'm typically wanting to blame somebody, and they're like, "Oh crap, that was me. I'm sorry, I did that." Who left the water trough on? Oops, that was me. Darn it, you know.
That's now I set a timer on my phone, but if I forget to set the timer on my phone, then I'm still at risk there. We've had a couple.
Yes,
So
sir.
one of my first of the sponsors like that, I had a lady on, and I made up a funny deal about, or I thought it was funny anyway, but it was a sports bra for women equestrians that let sweat out and didn't let hay in. And I can't tell you how many people contacted me wondering where they could buy that sports bra. There's a market out there for some of this stuff, folks.
Yeah, no, no
Anyway.
kidding. Yeah, right. So sweat out and the hay, or yeah, the sweat in and the hay out. That's a great one.
Um, well, we kind of broached the subject. I was curious with your experience and knowledge, and you've been one of the road warriors and met a lot of the people and seen a lot of the things. Are there any other sort of common problems or misunderstandings within the industry that you wish we would just figure out and get this straight, or things that you see, maybe directions that you see the horse industry going on? I'll say one caveat to that. You and I are both leadership guys, and I was going to make a whole topic out of that in a minute, because there is kind of an anti leadership where it's almost become a dirty word to some people. And I thought we'd tackle that as its own subject in a minute. But are there any other trends or problems or common misunderstandings that you see in the industry that you'd like to get off your chest?
Oh, Daniel, I guess we all just need to realize why we're doing it and what's the purpose. You know, there seems to be, and of course I'm guilty of it as well. There seems to be sometimes we tend to pick a segment out of the industry that we just don't like. For example, I was just up there this weekend judging that horse show, and I heard a half a dozen people talking about, oh, they love the way we do our ranch riding and that sort of thing because it's so much better than the peanut pushers. And I appreciate their input on that. I appreciate their opinion on that. But couldn't that same person that's riding the peanut pusher question why we have sliding plates on our ranch horses? Couldn't that same person that's complaining about the peanut pusher take a look at themselves when they do a 30-foot slide and stop? Shouldn't that same person that's complaining about the peanut pusher consider why we spin our horses in reining? In other words, every discipline, regardless of what that is, has certain goofy things that we do that really has absolutely no real practical place in the world. So why do we do it? Is because we as Americans like more. We want, if it can be done a little, we want to do it a lot. If we can slide a little, we want to slide a lot. If we can go around the barrels in 16 seconds, we can go around the barrels in 15 seconds. But that's just our typical American way, isn't it? But what I'd really want people to realize, even though there might be some things about certain disciplines that we may not love or that we may not like, we all are in the horse industry because we love what we do and we love being around our horses. And there's particular things in the industry that appeal to us. And that, again, is what's all about American freedom. We can all choose to ride the non peanut pusher, or we can choose to ride the horse that slides 30 feet, or we can choose to ride the horse with our hand down that just eats up a cow alive. And in other words, we all have that freedom to go to the other. But let's not, please, let's not look down upon the others, because that's no different than putting down the guy that loves a Chevrolet versus a Ford just because you drive a Dodge. And in other words, we all have that freedom of choice. And if it all benefits the industry, then we're all benefiting from it. So I think what I'd love to see is that as we get more and more specialized in what we're doing within the industry, I also think we all need to practice a lot more understanding and tolerance in the industry. I'm all about the folks that not liking the peanut pushers. But Daniel, I made a living training them for a while because I was starving to death and I needed the money. And I was riding those Western pleasure ponies because it was paying the bills. And unfortunately, we just had really good success with it, which kept the horses coming. But it also, I didn't like the fact that we had kind of created some of these false gates. But like I said earlier, I can't complain about the false gate at the canter if I'm sliding a horse 30 feet because that's pretty false too. So I guess what we're really saying is let's just all ride, have fun, enjoy the differences that we do have, and be tolerant of every discipline that's out there, even if it's not something that we do. And we're starting to see that a lot, but at the same time, we also see the folks that want to get a little bit snobby. I'd really encourage those snobby folks just to kind of take a little bit different perspective.
Except for barrel racers. It's perfectly fine to hate barrel racers. So just everybody, just so you know. uh,
I used
well,
to. It's funny, Daniel. If I used to tell everybody, I've earned the right to say stuff about barrel racers because I used to be a calf roper, and when you're not roping calves, you're chasing barrel racers. So you just, you just, but but yeah, they're all sorts of different standards, isn't there, for every industry.
well,
So as long as we're all still practicing good, solid horsemanship, and we focus on that, then sooner or later to get to a whole nother level, that horsemanship has got to be expounded upon. And it does. It always comes out in the end. Sherry Servey, for example, is one of my favorite barrel racers. I love the athleticism and everything else that goes into barrel racing, but we've all seen some of those horses that come down the alleyway a little bit goofy, and we've seen some of the contraptions that some of the folks put on their faces that causes some of that goofiness. But I love to watch people like Sherry Servey, who kind of in the warm up pen looks like she's just warming up a ranch horse. Then she comes down the alleyway and her horses just look calm and quiet and relaxed. She goes and runs her pattern just as hard and as fast as all the other girls. She's never pulling, jerking, and snatching, and she's always centered on her horse. And she's not the only one. She's just ones that come to mind because I've watched her for so many years now. But I just wish that she would influence more and more young women to consider the way that she gets the same job done as some of those people that yell, jerk, spur, and do whatever, and kind of create crotch rockets out of their horses. Because Sherry gets the job done as she has done for years, so nobody can say it's a fluke either.
well, to play a little bit of the devil's advocate to some of what you said, I'm certainly all for the tolerance. And one of the things I get somewhat involved in a lot of the legal legislative matters of this stuff, and I really very firmly believe that we have a common enemy out there that just loves anytime we do infighting and stuff like that, and they take that and use that as ammunition against us. At the same time, I feel like we could do a better job of policing our own. And
Yes.
to me, sort of the weak link in the chain always comes down to the judging. And you and I have both done a decent bit of judging of different things, and I'm sure you have been invited to be a judge, and you show up at an event and you're not really sure exactly what the criteria of how this particular association judges this ranch class or whatever. Sometimes the communication isn't really good there, and it can vary place to place, and sometimes the rules are not necessarily written by someone who is as knowledgeable as they might be on the topic. So I'll give an example of that. There was an association I was a double A judge for, and the guy that wrote the rules and was running it was an ex-reining horse trainer, and he had written in the rules he was intending to outlaw gag bits, but the way he had defined it, he had technically outlawed all curb bits. And I was reminding him of that for 3 years before he finally changed the language in the rule book. But we've
Wow.
also got situations where there are long-standing rules, and I'll pick on reining because I love to pick on reining. In the last 20 years, they've gone from spins that were significantly, or let's say there was a high degree of importance put on the inside hind leg pivot, and now the horses have gotten a lot sloppier but a lot faster. But that horse might start in one place, and by the time he gets stopped, he may have shifted 10 feet to the left and still would be a plus 1/2 kind of a horse. And it's also very common to see they're going to do a 15-foot side pass before their lead departure, and those sorts of things don't get picked up on with this is one of the things that mystifies me as a cow horse guy, but it's reasonably common to see them do a rollback and leave that rollback on the wrong lead, and they've got a quarter of the arena to change leads before that becomes a penalty. In fact, Sean Flaraday is very well known for that, and how if I had to train a horse to do that, I don't know how I would get him to do it. Like, you should never be able to leave a rollback on the wrong hind leg. But anyway, I kind of feel like a lot of that stuff just comes down to the judging. If we weren't lax in some of those areas, the trainers that want to win would clean that up tomorrow. I mean, to use your peanut rolling example, I mean, if you outlawed that and you went by it, and if a pole was below the withers, the horse was DQ'd in 6 weeks, you would never see that again. It would disappear overnight, essentially. But we kind of allow some of those things to continue. So all right, I guess I got on a soapbox, but I'll let you on the soapbox now if you got anything you want to add to that.
No, I'm right there with you. And in some defenses, for example, a friend of mine by the name of Alex Ross used to be, and he might still be, used to be on the judges committee for the AQHA. And a few years ago, you might recall, there was a big movement toward trying to change Western pleasure, and they talked about the change long prior before the Congress, but the Congress was going to be where they kind of put the nail in the coffin, so to speak. That was going to be the do or die show. And several people got gated because their horses weren't moving out enough. And like you said, their pole was below the withers for more than a certain specific number of strides that they had come up with. And they started with the open classes. They started gating some of these top end Western pleasure trainers. They'd ask them for more movement the first time, more movement the second time, and on the third request, they were gated. They just basically disqualified them and have them leave the arena. And it made a huge impact, but only for a very short period of time, mainly because the industry itself wanted that. Despite the fact that everybody agreed that it didn't look good, that we were getting complaints from people that were outside the industry complaining that these horses looked lame and they were requesting lameness exams. So, despite the fact that they were trying to make a stand against it, the industry didn't want the change. The trainers didn't want the change, nor did the trainers' clients want the change. So basically, in that case, the judges and the judges committee kind of got outvoted, so to speak. And in the world of democracy, the numbers count. Now, but there are other areas where we can make those stands. For example, I got booed awful bad by this, and I got a few phone calls. But I was asked to judge a fairly significant American Paint Horse Association show, and here comes this drop dead gorgeous looking paint filly come walking toward me, and I'm checking her out, thinking, "Oh my goodness, this little filly is just gorgeous. I mean, she's just built to the hilt." But I stepped to the side so that she could trot by me. When I stepped to the side, I realized that she had two surgical scars on her knees, one on each knee. Actually, two scars on each knee. Well, that kind of got me peculiar because I'm thinking those are just too uniform for them to be natural. They were obviously surgical scars. So when the horses all got set up, I just happened to be circling around. And again, I'm admiring this filly, thinking how awesome she is and how drop dead gorgeous she was. I mean, she fit the T of a halter horse exceptionally. But I didn't place her because when I was checking her out, I just happened to voice to the girl that was showing her, said, well, how'd the surgeries turn out? They get her straightened up? And the young girl says, yes, sir. She's all straight now. Okay. Well, I didn't place her. I didn't even place her. She wasn't not in the top 6. She wasn't even placed, period. I didn't place her at all. Well, the lady who owned her, not the girl who showed her, but the lady who owned her, started screaming and yelling and cussing. We've never taken this filly anywhere to any show ever that she's not won, first place in her class and sometimes won grand champion. You don't know what you're doing. Well, luckily for me, the APHA went and kind of consoled the lady and got her a little bit quiet and everything, and even threatened to reprimand her for addressing me, addressing the judge publicly.
Mm-hmm.
But then finally, the lady come to me a little bit cooler, a little bit calmer. She goes, I want to know why you didn't place my mare. You just didn't like her. Did you? And my trainer said that you said something to her. Ma'am, I just merely asked her if the surgery corrected the problem. And she said yes. I said, I want you to understand, I'm going to judge strictly for the integrity of the breed. This is a halter class. A halter class is supposed to exemplify the horses that are going to best represent the integrity of the breed. Therefore, we want our horses moving forward, especially our breeding horses, to be straight-legged and sound and with as near perfect conformation as possible. So if your horse had surgery on both knees, how do I know that this horse wasn't crooked-legged? And if the horse was crooked-legged, how do I know that that wasn't genetic? And if it's genetic, why would I allow, if I'm really looking out for the integrity of the breed, why would I allow this horse, since she's a filly, to continue and potentially pass on those genetics? So I don't even want to place her in the top 6, because if I do, I'm agreeing with the fact that I'm okay with the future of our breed being crooked-legged, potentially. And she still didn't agree with me.
Yes.
She felt like that her money should be able to buy the model that she wanted to create. But you see, Daniel, that doesn't do what our standard should be, which is to protect the integrity of the breed. And that's especially for the halter classes. But the performance classes are the same. Every class has a spirit and intent. And if the spirit and intent is exemplified in that particular class, then that spirit and intent is going to be rewarded with a higher score. But if the spirit and intent is not facilitated in that class, then the horse shouldn't score as well. And it's just that simple. But sadly, like you said, it takes sometimes the judges standing up to what's not popular. Because, see, the easy thing to do on that day with that little paint filly is to place her first, because she was by far better than all the rest of the horses in the class. But she had crooked legs.
Yes, sir.
See? So the easy thing to do would have been to place her. I would have had any controversy. Everybody would have agreed with me, except for anybody that really knew what the standard of integrity of the breed really was all about. And that's where sometimes, like I said in the very beginning of the day, advising the young folks, just stay true. Stay true.
Well, this really makes me want to ask you about your official position on boob jobs, but I guess I'll be more of a gentleman and just keep that to myself.
That's just plain false advertisement, isn't it?
Well,
yes, sir.
I will that does open a door here, and I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast. Keep in mind this is editable, so if you don't want to get into this, I will absolutely just cut this out. No worries. But in the reining world, we also have got a stallion that is carrying and propagating the deafness gene, and getting into these bald face horses and all that stuff. And the trainers like the colts because they aren't distracted. Kind of that sensitivity you and I were talking about earlier. But I don't know how you could say that propagating a known genetic defect that leads to deafness is a moral thing to do. And I can't imagine that 30 years ago that would have gone by. They wouldn't have allowed papers on that horse, I don't think. And now he's the 800-pound gorilla of the market. What are your feelings about that? And again, if you don't want to get into this swamp with me, that's perfectly reasonable. So,
Well, no, I'm kind of I love the horse. I love how athletic he is. I love how phenomenal he is. But I'm also concerned about that. If in fact it is genetic, then I would be
it
all
definitely is.
for.
Like, you can even test for it.
Yeah,
They know exactly what gene it is, so you can have the
right.
foals tested and everything. And yes,
Yes, sir. Then I'm my personal preference for the integrity would be okay. Great. I'm so glad that he himself is a great performance horse. But I wouldn't want to continue to pass that gene on. The same thing, probably not as severe, but with HYPP several years ago in the halter horse
mm-hmm.
industry, the same thing. And when they finally took a stand against it, it took less than 2 generations for it to breed itself out. And now you're lucky if you ever see a horse out there that's I mean, you'll never see one that's a positive because they won't allow it anymore. But once in a blue moon, you'll see, a positive negative, I mean, you won't see it. I mean, you'll see NNs. But nonetheless, I kind of think that is a controllable thing. I just wish they would go ahead and do it. And if the right people get pissed off enough, they will. If the right people want to stand up against it, then money talks, and money will basically stop that horse from being able to produce. Do I love the trainability? Everybody tells me about how trainable that horse's bloodlines are. Yes, I absolutely love that. Do I love the athleticism? Yes, absolutely love it. Do I? I'm personally not a big fan of bald faces, but I can't discriminate against everything. That's just a personal preference. But I just know that those horses are doing extremely well and very flashy. A lot of what people like. But man, I would have to run my flag up the pole against the deafness, because I just don't think that does anything for the future integrity of the breed.
Absolutely.
Before you know it, you got
Yeah,
a bunch of horses out there that run around that can't hear.
yeah. How do you turn that loose on a 2,000-acre ranch with coyotes and wolves and mountain lions in Montana? I mean, they're just that's I don't understand it, and I certainly get the capitalism part of it, because he was
Right.
awesome. If he had been mediocre, then maybe he never becomes And as you know, there are horses that are performers, and then there are horses that are breeding horses, and he just happens to be both. So,
Right. Yep. Yep.
not propagating him is a financial decision for sure, but propagating him is, I think it's hard to say it's not to the detriment of the breed as a whole. So anyway, you talked about halter horses. My first horse job was cleaning stalls at a halter horse barn. And not long ago, I was kind of curious what that trainer was up to. So I went ahead and looked him up, and he's now running one of the premier halter programs in the country. And so I thought I would look. They had just acquired this new stallion and had the poster of him and all of this stuff. And it's got the graphics and all of it. I'm not going to name the program or anything, but this was the most post-legged horse I have ever seen in my life. It almost looked like it had been photoshopped. You could have drawn a straight line from the stifle through the hop through the fetlock. I mean, he had absolutely a straight hind leg. And again, I'm just going like, that's supposed to be a halter horse. He's supposed to be
Right.
the epitome of structural correctness, and this is a major structural flaw that would never have flown years ago. And here he is, one of the top stallions in the country, propagating a known genetic flaw, and we're just letting it fly. And I mean, he's a top, one of the top horses in that breed. And I'm just going like, in the day of Matlock and Buster and True Horsemen, looking at a hind leg like that would have been an orange billboard. You couldn't unsee it. There's no way it would have
Right.
been
Yes, sir.
And now
Right.
it's out there and nobody seems to pick up on it. I don't know. But
Yes, sir.
anyway, their horse, their choice, I suppose. Well, Van, why don't we get
Well,
into some of your offerings? You have a book that you came out with here a couple of months ago, I guess. The Horse is My Teacher. You've got your Top Hand Club, which is your subscription side to your website. And then you've got your intern program. And I know you still do some clinics and things. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that stuff?
well, you betcha. Well, we're very proud of that book. It was actually inspired by one of my clients. I hate to admit it, Daniel, but close to 20 something years ago, she just loved all the stories that I shared about some of my mentors along the way and some of the things that they would say to me and the ways that I would share those when I was talking to my customers and clients. And even at the horse expos, I share the same type of stories. And she just happened to say, well, Van, you need to write a book. And that got me thinking that, yes, I probably did. But honestly, I just didn't think I had the discipline to do it. And I didn't know if I was a good enough writer to do it. I'd written a few articles for various magazines, but I'd never even remotely attempted a book. Heck, it was hell on wheels to get me to turn in an essay in high school and college. But yeah, we finally sat down and started putting those stories together, and publisher snapped it up and put it out there. And it really, Daniel, is about the quotes that I use along the way. For example, one of them from my grandmother was like, "Yard by yard, life is hard, but inch by inch, it's a cinch." And I utilize that every single day in my horsemanship, but I also use it every single day in my humanship. So that's what the book is all about. It's got these quotes that I've learned from different people along the way, whether it be a grandparent or another trainer or a football coach or an English teacher or a math teacher. It's these things that have helped me tremendously over the years. And I tell about the origin of the quote, where it came from, and then how I utilize it in both my horsemanship and my humanship. And again, that book is called The Horse is My Teacher. If people are ever interested in that book, we're tickled to death to do signed copies. And I do sign copies personal. I don't just sign a bunch of them to sell them. I always write something in there to whoever purchases the book, or of course they can buy it from Amazon. And as you mentioned, we've got what we call our intern program here, which is our Top Hand Horsemanship Academy. We will have our students come in for no less than 3 months at a time, and it's a pretty darn intense program. It's at least 6 days a week. Sometimes it's 7 days a week, and it's kind of what a horse trainer does day in and day out. And what I find out is these young folks that think they love horses and they want to ride. There's a big difference between wanting to ride and having to ride. Do I get to ride today, or do I got to ride today? So we really expose them to it. We really expose them to every aspect of the horse industry when they're here going through our program. And then we also subject them to other trainers and other clinicians. And we also take them on road trips. For example, one of my sponsors is Reinsman and Circle Y. So we let them go over there and see how bits are made, how reins are made, how headstalls are made, and how saddles are made. And they get a chance to tour that facility and tour that factory. And all of that's part of that 3 month program. We've only had a couple of students that have gone through the entire program that didn't pass, but most of them do. My test for passing is pretty simple as far as their horsemanship goes. They all have to start a colt under saddle, and at the end of that 90 days, if I can't walk, trot, and lope that colt and change leads, in other words, do simple lead changes on that colt with nothing but just a string around its neck, it doesn't pass the course. So I expect those young folks to get those colts going good enough to where I can get on them and get them walk, trot, lope on the correct lead, and then also do simple lead changes with just a string around its neck. Most people can't get that done in a whole heck of a lot longer than 90 days, but my students will get it done in the first 90 days. But they don't where they're not allowed to make a mistake. In other words, we allow them to make mistakes, but they found out really quickly what they can truly achieve in a very limited amount of time when they don't have to go back and fix things. And so that's kind of the biggest thing that we work with is just having a step by step approach and working with whatever the horse needs to have worked on at the time. And then, of course, we've got our program to where we call it an extended stay program. This is where folks can come out to the ranch and spend literally anywhere between an extended weekend, a long weekend, all the way up to 3 and 4 months at a time. We've had people hang out. Like I said, we've got a couple here from New Zealand now that's been here right at 4 months. In fact, they're leaving this Thursday. And we love to have folks come out, Daniel. Victoria, Texas is a very interesting area, a lot of history in the area, a lot of ranch history in the area. There's lots to do in the area. And at the same time, if they're here for the horse education, we ride all day, every day. So it's lots of stuff for folks to do. Hope I didn't leave anything out, Daniel, but if I did, just let us know and we can try to cover something another time.
And I don't know if I mentioned this in the beginning, but in the show notes of this episode, there'll be links to all of Van's stuff, his website and social media and everything. So y'all can find all of that and get a copy of his book and get it signed and all of that stuff. And I'm sure there's some very good stories and things in there to pick apart and get a nugget or two from. One thing I wanted to ask you about specifically, Van, is you have this term that you use, and it's very uniquely your own, and that's humanship. How do you define humanship?
How I define it, what I refer to is that we think about, you hit on a buzzword earlier about leadership. Most of the things that we see and that we follow in other humans, they have these certain characteristics about them that makes us attracted to them. And it is ranging from stuff from kindness, understanding, empathy, honesty, integrity. And those are the things that I feel like that a horse gives us an opportunity to practice every single day. The good thing about horses, and I'm sure dog people say the same thing, but the good thing about horses, they don't have the capacity to lie. They don't have the capacity to be evil. They don't have the capacity to do all the things that we don't like about good humans. So horses afford us that opportunity to practice our humanship skills because their only feedback to us is 110% honest feedback. They have no incentive to have an ulterior motive. They have no incentive to tell us something that they think that we want to hear. So they tell us very quickly if my kindness works. They tell me really quickly if my aggression works or if it didn't work. They tell me very quickly if my temper got in the way. They tell me very quickly if my leadership helped. They tell me very quickly all the things that I need to know about being a good leader and a good human with all those positive characteristics that we'd love to see in our human leaders. So I guess that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about horsemanship and humanship paralleling and that humanship aspect. Horses give us an opportunity to practice being better humans every single day. Every time you work with one of them, their feedback is just absolutely honest and invaluable.
It's a beautiful thing for sure. I'm a little bit of the opposite of you in that I got into horses to not have to deal with people. It didn't work out quite like I had anticipated. I also had no idea how many hours I was going to spend behind a computer in the horse business, but that's just how it goes
Yes, sir.
sometimes. But I absolutely love how literal horses are because people are significantly more difficult to read. And well, leadership, I guess, was the last topic that I had to discuss, but I haven't figured out a clever way to extract this fact from you. So I'm just going to bluntly ask, is there a special cool thing that you got to, I guess, fruit to pluck from the tree of being a dad and practicing this humanship throughout your life? I know you recently had a pretty cool again, I'm muddling this, so I'm just going to let you tell the story. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, sir. Well, God blesses us with children ever so often, and and I was truly blessed with two wonderful daughters. My oldest daughter was born in 1991 in New Zealand, and we brought her back here in 1992. And coincidentally, that's the same year that I opened my training facility there in Sulphur Springs, Texas. Up until the time the girls were born, the only thing I knew about teaching anything was horses. I'd had lots of experience with horses, but zero experiences with children. And I kept hearing people warn me about, oh, you just wait until they hit those terrible twos. Well, the terrible twos hit, and I never experienced it. And then because we survived that, I guess the negative folks wanted to tell me how bad the teenage years were going to be, and they kept telling me, oh, you just wait until they turn teenager. And the teenage years came, and we never saw any real issues. And then people say, well, man, I just can't believe your daughters turned out so good. How did you get your daughters to be so good and so sweet and so kind and so successful? And I said, I have no idea. Number one, I guess their mama had a pretty good role in it. Number two, as far as the training goes, I just train them like I do the horses. And some people would laugh and cut and chuckle about that. And then I'd finally explain. I made just like we do in a lot of stuff. I make the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult. If they were doing the right thing, I just left them alone. If they didn't do the right thing, I'd correct them and I'd hold them accountable and I'd get out of their way and I'd give them opportunity they're going to do and they're going to make mistakes. But when they made a mistake, we corrected them, showed them what we wanted, then we got out of the way. And before you know it, and I always said this, my girl's job was to train me to leave them alone. My girl's job was to train me, if they didn't like me fussing at them, to train me not to fuss at them. But my commitment to them was that anytime that they weren't walking the straight and narrow, is to correct them. And they did a good job at it. And the girls turned out really good. And I think it was just because we were very blunt about it. We were very direct. I used to tell the girls at a really young age, I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to be your daddy. And the blessing is later in life when you realize that your friends, that is the true blessing of what I would call the parenthood side of life, but also feel the same way about my horses. When I walk out there to the pasture, and I'm very demanding of my horses, I expect them to perform at their best ability. I expect nothing less. In fact, all of my students hear me say several times a day, we do not settle for average around here. Average is easy. Nobody here is going to be average. Everybody's going to be a lot better than average. We train 120% so that 100% seems easy. And I think taking that discipline, Daniel, to from the horses into the children and then back to the horses again has really helped me set a good standard for myself and my expectations. But it also helps the girls, my daughters, their children now, and my students hold themselves to a higher standard than they thought possible. And then we learn to appreciate those who helped us hold them or help them hold themselves to that higher standard. The true blessing of that to me, and where I really realized that I wasn't being unfair to my daughters, because we also teach being firm but fair, is when my oldest daughter got married. She called me and said, "Hey, Dad, you're not ordained, are you?" So, "No, sweetie, I'm pretty darn spiritual and pretty religious, but no, ma'am, I'm not ordained." And Jazz asked if I would please go get ordained so that I could perform her now husband's wedding. And Daniel, it just brought me to tears. But of course, I did my dead level best to go get ordained in a timely manner so that I could both give my daughter away as well as preside over her wedding. And of course, only, I guess, right at 2 years later, my younger daughter said the same thing. "Hey, Dad, now that you're ordained, I want you to give me away as well as perform our wedding." And that's when I really realized, Daniel, that maybe being firm but fair with the daughters really paid off. Because there were times, as we do sometimes as parents, and as sometimes we do as horse trainers, sometimes we question our own techniques and our own methods. Maybe I was a little bit too hard here. Maybe I was a little bit too firm there. And that just confirmed in my mind that we must have done something right, that the girls asked me to be the minister of their weddings.
That's quite a unique honor. That is definitely a life goal right there, to still have that sort of relationship with your kids once they become adults. So big kudos to you for that one.
Well, I Appreciate it. And you're right. I think it is an honor. And I thank my girls for that honor every day, because the easy thing for me to do would just been to go hire somebody for a couple $100 or whatever it costs. But for them to ask me to do it was the least that I could do. But it sure made me feel, maybe it sure made me feel good about our relationships.
Absolutely. Well, I guess to wrap up my last question, we'll go back into the leadership. And I was listening to an episode of your podcast, which is called Ride Every Stride. And you were talking about leadership and trust and bonding and connection. And sort of, I know that's been a few years ago since you did this episode. So you were talking about people that like to go out into the pasture and kind of commune with their horses and have the sense that they are building a relationship with them while they're out there hanging out with them. And I really appreciated your point of view on that. Do you recall sort of the line I'm trying to lead you to here?
Yeah, vaguely, Daniel, but keep going with that, and you're going to strike a nerve with me, and I can follow up.
Sure. It was basically that when we build a relationship and all, we do that through actions. And when we're just passively sitting in a chair out there with the horse, you didn't say this, but the thought I had on it was what you really are teaching that horse is to ignore you. They're just putting their head down in the grass and paying you no mind whatsoever. And the person's sitting there with the sense that they've just really accomplished some stuff and furthered a relationship. And I don't know that I don't think that you believe that to be true, and I don't believe that to be true either. I would say
Right.
maybe the caveat to that is if we have that feral horse, we're sitting within 30 feet of that horse's pressure. Well, getting that horse to be desensitized enough to our presence to be able to eat with us close by would be progress, but that's not the horse that 99.9% of people are dealing with. So if you have the training level dressage horse that you've owned for 4 years, then potentially sitting in a chair in a pasture reading a book isn't the most effective use of time that you could
Yeah.
have. And it isn't going to really build trust and so forth. I feel like I'm talking too much. I need to let you jump in here.
No, no, I actually very much appreciate what you're saying, and I do believe that. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the action word earlier. That to be a good leader is really just someone who is exceptional at communication, and just sitting in the room is almost like sitting in the room with your spouse. If you're both sitting in the room and you've got the TV on, or if you're sitting in the pasture and the horse is eating grass and you're just sitting there in your chair reading a book, what sort of engagement is taking place? And there's a big, huge difference. And this is another great thing I think a lot of parents need to learn. Being in the same house with your kids is not sharing time with them. Engagement is what shares time, and what makes that time valuable and meaningful. And there's not a doubt in my mind the exact same thing applies with our horses. That when I walk into the room with my horse, let's say I walk into the room, whether I'm walking into a stall or walking into the pasture, the minute I walk in that room, there is a presence. And if I choose to be ignored, then all I need to do is just kind of remain kind of quiet and kind of out of the deal. But if I want to engage, then I have to make myself known. And at that point in time is when the engagement and the quote unquote relationship, and some people want to refer to it as bonding, that's when bonding takes place. But I want people to understand too that little fine line what bonding really means. Bonding to me means that yes, we're understanding of each other, and we also understand that in this bond, one of us needs to be the leader, and it has to be the human being. In this relationship with a horse, it has to be the human being. The bond comes with the understanding of that relationship. As long as we understand that, we're going to get along really well. But if we're lacking an understanding of that, then there's going to be turmoil in the relationship. There's going to be distrust. Well, who's leading? Who's doing this? Well, I thought you were. No, I thought you were. I don't want the leadership role. You take the leadership role. You cannot have that in a good, working, productive relationship. Number one, there has to be engagement. And then there has to be the understanding of role. Who is the leader? The horse has a role to play, and I have a role to play. And if we're going to be horsemen, whether we want to be or not, if we own horses, we have to be the horsemen. Therefore, our role is to be the leader. And I kind of hope that's what you're kind of leading at, because that's truly my thoughts, is that we need to be engaged, and we also need to be engaged with a full understanding of each other's roles. And then here's the coolest part. When I'm working with a colt, even a horse that I don't know, I don't on purpose work on hooking up and joining up and all that crap. I'm not in the business of selling DVDs and videos because I can get any freaking wild ass horse out there to follow me around a round pen. In fact, Daniel, I've never had it fail, and I've never once made it my priority to get this horse to hook on or join up. So why does the horse do it then, if that wasn't my goal? Because we've established a role that I now am the leader, and I earn that leadership role not by fear and intimidation, but by simply the respect of the role. And it's so many times I'm working with a horse, and I walk off to go grab my saddle to saddle him for the first time, and the sucker's in my hip pocket. And not a single time did I plan that. It wasn't a goal or an objective. So how did that happen? There's your bond. There's your acceptance of your role. The horse will feel and sense the respect that I have for him and his role or her. And the horse, too, will then gladly give me the respect due for my role. Why? Because it was earned. And there's my take on leadership and bonding when it comes to horses and horsemanship.
Yes, sir. People talk a lot about trust. I've never really felt that trust was something you can work on directly with the horse. I view it more as sort of the byproduct of everything else that you do. You either are fair and consistent, and they learn to trust you, I guess. But there's not like a trust fall exercise or something where we can work on this connection. It's your timing. It's how well you read them. If you backed off at the right time, if you were wrong about what they meant when they did this with their body language or whatever, those are the things that build. And kind of like you were saying with your kids, you're not necessarily there to be their friend. I think the role with the horse is very much or very similar to, not an exact replication, but very similar to a parent-child sort of a dynamic. And there are times where that horse may not like me, but I don't need him to like me. I need him to respect me and obey,
Right.
just like your kids. There may be moments, on the micro end of the scale where things aren't real smooth, but it's way more important that that moment happens in the big picture, and we kind of sacrifice the small picture at a time, or not sacrifice, but we use it appropriately, even though it might not be something that's enjoyable in the moment. At any rate,
Yes, sir.
I really find we've got this leadership and dominance and all. Sort of what always comes to mind when I hear the bad talking about dominance is, do you remember the professional wrestler Macho Man Randy Savage?
Oh, yes, sir. I remember that. Yes, sir. Yep.
I always hear in the back of my head that you need to be dominant to your horse, but that's not the same thing as dominate. There's
Right.
kind of degrees to this stuff, and a lot of times moderation is the place to be. But anyway,
Right. Yep.
well, Van, that's kind of everything that I had planned on talking with. I'll certainly give you the floor if there's anything else you wanted to bring up or that I forgot or whatever. Now's the time.
Well, Daniel, I can't think of a thing other than I deeply appreciate the fact that you've given me an opportunity to visit with both you as well as your audience. And the time shared with you is just very, very precious. I appreciate that, because I know we've made phone contact a time or two in the past, or message contact back and forth in the past, but yet we've not had an opportunity to sit down and visit this long. So it's been a great pleasure for me to be able to do that. And I just hope that your listeners get something out of it.
I'm sure they will. And we had actually, I think I was speaking more with your wife, but we were in talks of trying to set up a co-clinic together, and then COVID hit, and that of course blew the whole world up. So I would love to get together with you and do something like that. I hadn't got to ride with you yet, and I would love to do it at some point. So that's an open invitation. If we can figure out how to make it work and the logistics of it, I'd love to do it. So
You bet. That sounds wonderful to me. And I know it seems that we've got a lot of folks from your part of the country coming this direction for some of the stock horse shows. So maybe we can kind of make that kind of blend and work for everybody, and we can take advantage of those folks interested in that area, and then at the same time put both you and I in the saddle together sometime as well.
absolutely. Well, folks, you heard it. We're interested. So when y'all see this episode put out on social media, hit us up, and either one of us, and we'll figure out, make sure we got the audience together and where it makes sense to do it. And we'd like to do it if y'all'd like to do it. So, well, like I say, Van, we'll have in the show notes, we'll have links to all of your stuff. It's probably going to be about 2 weeks from now before I get this all edited and ready to release. But I'll contact you and let y'all know when it's coming out, and if y'all will put it on your social media and everything, and hopefully get as many ears on it as we can get. Folks, as always, I'll remind y'all, I have a Facebook group, Bit Spurs and Good Sense, and that's where I do a lot of the question and answer stuff and pose. This person's going to be on the podcast. I'll be interviewing them if y'all have specific questions for them, or take requests on, hey, you need to have so and so on. So check out that group and hit us up. And Van, I certainly do thank you for coming on. I apologize it's taken me this long to get you on here. You've been on the list from the very beginning, I can assure you of that. But I'm glad that we got to make it happen. So,
yes, sir. Appreciate it very much. And again, thank you for affording me the opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. Give your best, my best to your wife, and we'll be in touch.
Likewise. Thank you, Daniel.
Yes, sir. We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.